Good morning and welcome to the first ever Comment Features video podcast. I'm Owen Earwicker.
And I'm Elisha, Owen.
And today we're joined by James Dolton and Andy Peck. Good morning.
Morning.
First of all, James.
Yeah, so James, you speak in this week's article about football and finance. From reading your article, one of the main issues seems to be that football clubs are playing with money they don't have. Can you just expand on that?
Well, yeah, it's the concept of having money in football is a strange one, because the example I gave in the article was Liverpool Football Club. In 2010 they were facing a financial crisis because their old owners had made them be ridden with debt and they were a loss-making business. Then they got bought out by a fellow called Tom Hicks, I think. We're in New England Sports Group, the same people who own Boston Red Sox in America, who wrote off all their debt. So now they are a club with money. They aren't a penniless club, which they were, but the industry hasn't changed. They still are a loss-making club, and it seems very strange that the clubs that end up bankrupted don't actually have any more money, like more revenue and more profit than any of the others. They're just sort of unlucky with their owners, which is sort of sad, really. There are very few clubs that are actually profitable, and there are quite a few who would be, but for the exorbitant transfer fees they pay.
We were looking at figures in terms of the debt that Premier football clubs are in. We're looking at Manchester United, I think it was 519 million or something crazy like that. And yet, the industry is very much about money. Money is thrown around buying players, and that just seems to be ridiculous to me. I know I'm not a football fan, but I don't know. And do you think it's validated?
It's a constantly inflating business, because there are several clubs. There's one in most of the top leagues now who are owned by oil, basically. There's a club called Anzi Makachkla in somewhere in the EU, just off of the Ukraine. It's in the Russian league anyway, and they pay a guy called Samuel Eto'o, who's one of the best African footballers of all time. He's a Cameroonian top goal scorer. He's paid £425,000 a week to play for them. This is the same club who I think fly their players 4.5 hours to go to their training ground, because they live in Moscow because they've decided it's too cold where they're from, and Angie, I suppose. It's bizarre the amount of money thrown around.
Do you think there's ever going to be a point when they say we need to stop? Do you think it's ever going to regress? Or will it just keep becoming more existential? I don't know.
It can't keep going. There isn't enough money in the world.
There's got to be, surely, falling off the edge.
There will come a point that either it will reform, or more likely it will fall to bits. But it can't keep continuing. £50 million for one person's legs for 6 years is the fees aren't even the contracts, and you will lose a player at the end if you don't offer them even more money. And the sums of finance thrown around is just outrageous, and you can't.
You draw parallels in your article between the football industry and world politics. So would you say that football is increasingly becoming a reflection of capitalism in that sense?
Well, yeah, it's always been dominated by money. It's sort of romanticised to suggest anything but that. Even in the 70s, in the good old days, where people like Chopper Harris used to play. Brian Clough was incredibly successful. He was also spent a lot of money, but the difference is that now the sums of money are so much more that you can't have a sort of rags to riches story with a local businessman. It's got to be a sort of like an oil magnate or a sheikh, basically, where before it was easier to do. Now to compete, you really do have to spend billions of pounds, and it's sort of alarming that it has become completely dominated by money. If you draw a table of last year's finalists in the Premiership, I've seen this chart, then there are only three teams that aren't in their position that the wage structure says they should be. So the bottom club went down and the top club won. I think the only 3 teams that's not true for were Arsenal, who were slightly higher, Man City, who were one lower, and Wolves, who should have been relegated and won. But it's sort of that's kind of frightening, really, that you can just spend a lot of money and that's all you need to do to be successful.
Yeah, Andy, as an expert on politics, I know you are. What do you say about world politics and football in relation to each other? Do you think that that's
Well, I'd say there's a very clear sort of correlation to be found in the fact that it doesn't rely solely on capital anymore. If you look at sort of the big teams that do quite well, are the ones that have wealthy backers behind them, the ones that sort of flood lots of money, bail the clubs out, as it would do. And we find that in the international economy. I have a lot of unsustainable economic countries, banks, corporations that are bailed out with free money. It's not capitalism. It's a kind of cronyism, if it would be, because you're not relying on the money as a means of success. I think even sort of people said TV money ruined the game, but it didn't. It sort of added a reward for doing well. So those clubs that had a successful formula would do quite well. You could have a gamble like Leeds United did, where they almost got there and they fell, but that's the price they paid for trying to do well with the capital. But having sort of money thrown in left, right and centre with no base or no correlation to the actual success or the actual success of the teams is kind of ruinous to the competition.
The concept of being too big to fail is very much one that's due in football, and as much as it's due in the banking sector. In Darlington FC, who are lowly in the conference, they're not even in the Football League, they built a 25,000-seater stadium, which was ridiculous, sort of gambling on better times they didn't come, and now they're facing a winding up petition. But the amount of money they owe is far less than the amount of money that's owed by Rangers, who have just now been put into, what's the word? You know what I mean? Embarrassing. Administration. And yet they owe far less than Manchester United do. They owe actually a 50th of what Manchester United do. But because Manchester United are a big club and a big name, debt's sustainable. But
that phrase just
what
seems
is
incomprehensible
sustainable
to
debt?
me. Yeah.
When you're a loss-making club, it will only get bigger.
Yeah.
And the only way it gets smaller is if some big shot walks in and just pays it off. But that's not solving the problem at all.
Yeah.
Okay, should we move on to our next topic, which is the US elections. Andy is our US elections correspondent, as it were. First of all, we're coming up to Super Tuesday. What is Super Tuesday and how will it change things?
Well, Super Tuesday is March the 6th, which I believe is a Tuesday. I hope it's Tuesday, otherwise I've got the date wrong. Where essentially all of the states that haven't gone already, apart from the few that are a bit behind, all band together to try and make a big impact on the elections altogether. Because there's usually a kind of a sort of a cat fight between all the states as to who goes first. Iowa always goes first because Iowa always goes first, but it's written into the New Hampshire Constitution that they're the first primary. But Iowa's a caucus, so they can get away with being a week before. But they always say a week before New Hampshire. New Hampshire's always the first one. So. All of the states say they can't compete, so they say, fine, we'll go safety in numbers. Everybody, all the big states, there's got Texas, California, where all the big delegate numbers are, where the main population centres are, and all these whole host of things. How it will affect the competition? Competition, not it's the election, it's not competition. Is how will Romney do out of it? It's very touch and go with the Romney campaign so far. He won Michigan, which is just a sort of lifeline. If he'd have lost Michigan, there would have been no hope for him because his father, George Romney, was governor there, big name, he ran for president in 1968. Had he lost that, people said he's not front runner anymore. He's slipping to Rick Santorum. But it's still dicey. Nobody knew quite who had won Michigan until a few hours after the polls closed, until right up to the point where the polls closed. It was so close.
I mean, do you think this is more clear that Romney's going to win? Do you think that Romney will win this, even though there is uncertainty with things in Michigan?
Now I would say he's got it in the bag to a degree, but he's been so bruised and battered. Ordinarily, you'd expect the leading candidate to make a full clean sweep for Super Tuesday. That's what John McCain did in 2008, what Barack Obama did in 2008. It kind of almost decided by Super Tuesday. It was different because Hillary Clinton also did quite well on Super Tuesday. But this is not so certain because the southern states could still go for Newt Gingrich even though they lost cause. The Bible Belt could still go for Rick Santorum because nobody knows whether to go with the economic option or to go with the social conservatism. And it's troubling because he'll come through, but he'll come through so damaged and battered that it won't stand a chance again in the moment of the election.
Yeah. And on reflection, how do you think the elections are going so far? Do you think it's been a good election?
Well, it's been very interesting to watch. This is the thing, it's quite exciting to watch on the Republican side because nobody actually wants the job. These people, Barack Obama was going to get the Democratic nomination. That was never in question to start with. Unless the economy is really going to task, incumbent presidents aren't questioned by their own party. The Republican side, all the candidates are so weak, it was such an open field that nobody knows quite who's going to go. Look at the candidates. You've got Mitt Romney, who is a bit of a, well, not very charismatic, not very presidential, really. Didn't do very well in 2008, doing even worse in 2012. Newt Gingrich, who was washed up, he was sort of big in the 90s, 90s comeback kind of thing. He's now washed up again now. Ron Paul is, well, Ron Paul, so eccentric and so sort of, he's like a protest candidate.
Yeah.
And Rick Santorum, whose views are so extreme that these people just sort of wouldn't appear in a good election cycle. You would have a much stronger candidates.
Yeah.
I mean, the point that there are rising stars in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party even that just have not appeared this election cycle. People like Bobby Jindal, what's his name? Paul Ryan. There's other names that I can't remember off the top of my head, but these are young people that have got a lot of smarts about them, got kind of sort of big plans, but they're not appearing because they know that 2012 is a lost cause.
Yeah. And James, there was a lot of hype made about the last US elections here across the pond. Do you think that the British don't really care this time around?
Strong army. I think that it's less interesting because Obama was an exciting candidate, partially because we knew we were getting rid of George W., which was a hate figure in this country, or not even a hate figure, a figure of ridicule. Whereas this time, people still like Obama, but they kind of recognise he's not been the success that he could have turned out to be. Wanted to get people out of wars and got them in more and things like that. I know there's reasons, but in terms of just blatant facts, that's what's happened. People are just less interested, I think, than they were last time, just because there's less of a sort of revolution in the air.
Exactly, and like you said, candidates are less distinguishable, and I think, if you're looking at it from Britain's perspective, we would be more interested if there's a bit more.
But it's true, I say that the Republican candidates are quite poor. If you look on the face of it, Barack Obama's quite a poor candidate. What has he done in this 4 years apart from torn up every sort of election manifesto that he made in 2008? Reopened Guantanamo Bay, brought troops out of Iraq, but at the same time the Bush administration planned to do so. It's basically a continuation of the Bush doctrine, SOPA and PIPA, these kind of infringements on civil liberties. He's kept them going. It's not the kind of rhetoric that we were hearing in 2008, and people have wised up to that.
Yeah.
The candidates are all so lacklustre that Obama will get in, but is the best of a bad lot.
Yeah. Okay. James and Andy, thank you for joining us. You can
That's
find lots more content in print and online. Join us again next week for the Comment Features Vidcast. Thank you.